Okay, good morning. Nice to be back in.
Nice to have you back.
Thank you. Yes, been a while. And in fact, in a couple of days, I'm going off to retreat for a month. So I'll be back after Waisak. Sorry, after Waisak. All right. In our last class, which I did remotely from Australia, so I just want to check, can people from who are signed in, Chris, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, good. All right. So in our last class, I started talking about the unwholesome cittas rather, the 12 unwholesome cittas, and I looked at them from kind of like the big picture view of defilements and also from latent tendencies. In this class, we're going to zoom in on starting with the attachment rooted cittas and start exploring them in more detail. Okay, so move on. Before I do that, though, I want to first talk about the stages of sainthood. I'm still at the group level, and talk about the uprooting of the unwholesome cittas, which ones are allowed and which degree of sainthood. So for the Sotapanna, what is uprooted are all attachment-rooted cittas with wrong view. So you can see here that's 1, 2, 5, and 6, plus the delusion-rooted associated with 11. Weakened are all remaining cittas, right? So technically, what I want to make a point here is it is the latent tendency that is weakened, not the cittas. When there is the moment of path knowledge that marks the transition from worldling to Sotapanna, from Sotapanna to Satagami, Satagami to Anagami, Anagami to Arahant, what happens is there is, it's not just a change in perspective of the saint, but it's a fundamental restructuring of how the mind works, specifically latent defilements. As we talked about the latent defilements in the last class, it's because of the latent defilements and unwise attention that these unwholesome cittas arise. So if the latent defilement is weakened, then the odds on a citta arising are weakened. If the latent defilement is uprooted, the chance of a citta arising that's based on that latent defilement moves to 0. So at a Sotapanna, anything with wrong view, 1, 2, 5, and 6, and the associated with doubt. Why is that? What makes it so special? Well, the Sotapanna, they had just moved from being a worldling to having their very first direct experience of Nibbana. And that experience of Nibbana has a fundamental structural change to how they think, how that being thinks in that life and in future lives. Having experienced Nibbana, there is no way you could have doubt. So 11 is not possible. Why do you not have doubt? Well, it's because you've already experienced Nibbana the first time. How can you doubt the practice? How can you doubt the teachings of the Buddha if you have already achieved Nibbana once? That is proof positive that it is true. Okay, so cannot have 11. cannot have the wrong view of a self because of your direct personal experience of nama and rupa existing, but no self behind them. It's not possible to have wrong view anymore. So that's what happens for a sotapanna. Sakadagami. Oh, one more thing with the sotapanna. When it says all remaining chittas are weakened, to what extent are they weakened? They are weakened to the point where they can no longer cause rebirth in an unwholesome plane. In other words, the kinds of activities that they may cause one to do are weak enough that they're not going to cause rebirth in an unwholesome plane. So, as an example, I'm a worldling, and because of greed, I steal something that is potentially damaging enough for me to be reborn in a woeful plane, that act of theft. However, a sotapanna could never steal. They just, because their latent defilement has been uprooted to the point, or weakened to the point, where they're no longer technically able to perform any action which might cause rebirth in a woeful plane. Yes, they can still have attachment. They can say, oh, I enjoy this food, good cup of coffee. But that is not serious enough to cause rebirth in a woeful plane. Sakadagami, all remaining chittas are weakened. There's a big change between sotapanna and sakadagami. It's like everything is just no more strong pushes, just kind of like small little vibrations in the mind towards unwholesome. Anagami, the big change at the anagami level is attachment rooted 3, 4, 7, and 8 associated with sense objects are uprooted. So they would not say, oh, I like that cup of coffee, I really enjoy that cup of coffee, because they're not attached to the taste. They're not attached to the sense experience of that cup of coffee or any sense objects. And because of that, at time of rebirth, an anagami will never be reborn in a sense plane. The sensual planes being the woeful states, none, even the sotapanna is not reborn in woeful states, but an anagami is not going to be reborn in human or deva realm. They'll only be reborn in the realm without senses, because they don't care about senses. They don't want senses. There's no push for them to still have attachment to senses. Aversion is uprooted, and also attachment rooted is weakened, that is associated with existence. What kind of attachment does an anagami still have? They still want to continue to exist because they want to practice more. Oh, I want to practice more. Therefore, that desire to practice more, it gets translated into a desire for continued existence, and therefore they get reborn to allow them to continue their existence. Arahat, everything gets uprooted. Yeah.
Just look at the anagami, right?
Anagami.
Then I don't know, 3 number 4, right? And example, may say after the wrong view.
I'm sorry, an example of which?
Made for the anagami, right? Yeah, how they have to the either the 3 or 4.
3, 4, 7, and 8.
Either 3 or 4.
3 or 4. Okay.
Example.
All right. So here the anagami still will have attachment to existence, no longer to sense objects, but they will have attachment to existence. They'll say, oh, this practice is so good. I want to continue this practice with a pleasant feeling. All right. Now, the difference between 3 and 4 is unprompted versus prompted, which we'll get into shortly when I start doing a deep dive on them. But that is the fundamental 3 or 4. without wrong view, unprompted or prompted, with a pleasant feeling. Oh, this is such good practice. I want this practice to continue. I want to continue to be in this jhana or continue to practice vipassana, whatever their practice is. Okay, so that's what example 3 or 4 would be.
Then for the Satsapana, right?
Yep.
They have computed on the 1 and 2, right?
Yep.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I think is it computed or they know? They know. Maybe the Satsapana, they know. It means that the on this wrong view, but it's not computed. So it's because this
Okay, this is not because they thought it through and said, oh, this is a wrong view, I'm not going to have that anymore. This is a structural change to how the mind works because they experienced Nibbana only once. They experienced Nibbana once. Therefore, I'll give you an example. Okay, I'm standing on one side of the street and I say, I can jump this street. There is a faith, there is belief, right? When I say that, I haven't done it yet. I say I can jump this stream. However, after I have jumped the stream, when I say I can jump that stream, there's no element of faith. It's what's called a tautology. It is obviously evident, by definition true, because I've already jumped over the stream. So the idea of faith or confidence that I can jump over the stream does not arise in a sotapanna because they've already jumped. They've already experienced Nibbana. Structurally, it doesn't make sense for those wrong views to arise in their mind. The idea of a self, the Sakaya Ditti, the personality belief, cannot arise because of that experience of Nibbana, which they experienced because they saw through their own experience that it is only nama and rupa, mind and body. There is no self behind it. That self is an illusion. They know that it is an illusion. After you know how the magician performs his trick, you're no longer fooled by it. You just go, okay, he's skilled at doing it, but it doesn't fool me anymore. All right, so this is how wrong view is uprooted structurally because the latent defilement, which supports the arising of those cittas, has been uprooted, eradicated, right? Okay, so it's not because the Sotapanna thought it through and analyzed it. No. It's structural, fundamental. Okay. Other questions on this? Okay. Here is the same information presented pictorially. We've got the 12 unwholesome cittas on listed out here, and 3 and 4, 7 and 8 have been split into 2 different categories. One is sense objects, and sense objects here is all 6 senses. So it includes ideas and beliefs. And existence is attachment to existence. I want to continue to live. I want to continue to practice. That's the difference between 3 and 4. So worldling, it's black all along the whole line. And all those can arise. Number 1, number 2, 3, sense object, 3, existence, so on. Everything can arise. However, at the Sotapanna stage, we see that 1 and 2 are blocked off, they're cut off. 3, 4 are still there, but diminished. They're not quite so black, they're gray, dark gray. 7, 8, 9, and 10 continue to exist. 11 has been cut off. 11 is this associated with doubt. 12 continues to exist, but weakened. you'll notice that for the Sakatagami, the second stage of sainthood, nothing is cut off, but all the dark gray turn to light gray. And then at Anagami, we see that here that what's cut off is the number 3 when the object is a sense object, and again, all 6 senses, including ideas. But what remains is attachment to continued existence. But it's still very weak. All right, so the only things that continue to arise, the only unwholesome cittas that continue to arise in an anagami are the unprompted, without wrong view, pleasant viewing, related with an object of continued existence. Same with number 4, 7, 8, and restlessness continues. But when we get to arahat, blank column. No, they're all gone. Okay, so this is the same information, less words, just a picture, less words from the previous slides. All right. Now, let's talk about the actual practical progression of getting at that Sotapanna stage. There are, in the commentaries, they define 3 different levels of defilements. They have what they call transgressive defilements, which is things that you actually do, say, or do. So, killing, stealing, lying, sexual misconduct. Okay, those are transgressive defilements. They're manifested. They show up in bodily and verbal action. Okay, that's the most obvious. The level of practice is virtue, sila, precepts. Keeping your precepts. You're about to do something wrong. You're about to step on an ant and you go, You stop yourself, okay? Because you remember the precept. Because of the precepts, training, you get stopped because of sila or virtue. That is the coarsest, the grossest, the most obvious form of transgression or defilements. Below that are what are called the manifesting defilements. These are things in the mind that haven't yet happened. Okay, there's the intention. That's the intention to step on the ant. Okay, so how do we get rid of the intention to step on the ant? Hasn't yet happened, right? Not to the point where there's a reflection on the precepts, keeping precepts. Here, concentration. When there is the intention to step on the ant, there's an unwholesome state in the mind. I want to kill that ant. I don't like ants in my house. That is a intention in the mind. Not yet breaking the precept, but there's just the intention because I haven't killed anything. However, and that is an unwholesome citta, unwholesome state of mind, that intention. Concentration, samadhi, when there is wholesome concentration, doesn't have to be the jhana level, but at the jhana level or the neighborhood concentration level, it becomes extremely strong, where the mind is so concentrated, there's good mindfulness and concentration and wisdom. There's no opportunity for that unwholesome thought to arise. So concentration suppresses defilements. So virtue addresses defilements. Concentration suppresses defilements. During practice, by replacing the unwholesome with wholesome, the wholesome being the wholesome concentrated mind. Then, deeper than that, when we talked about the latent defilements, remember the anusaya, the latent defilements, which together with the unwise attention will allow that thought to arise. The latent tendencies, they are dormant in the life continuum. They haven't yet acted, they're not yet active, they haven't happened yet. But there is just the potential. The way that we get rid of these level of defilements is vipassana wisdom. They progressively, as I say, uproot through different stages of sainthood, progressively, the latent defilements at the pat moments. All right. Now, virtue, Pali word is sila. Concentration, the Pali word is samadhi. Vipassana wisdom, the Pali word is panya. So this is why, for example, the Visuddhimagga is organized into 3 sections: the sila section, the samadhi section, the panya section, because they're all talking about a progressive way of spiritual development leading to wisdom. Right? And this is the Theravada view that it's not through rites and rituals, it's not through chanting, it's not any of this that allows you to spiritually purify yourself. It is through wisdom. And wisdom happens through vipassana, through wise attention, seeing things as they truly are. Okay. Next, I'll start to go on to the start doing a deep dive on the attachment-rooted cittas. But before I, any questions so far? Yeah.
For the first 2 defilement, we tend to.
Mm-hmm.
And the third one, can we actually,
Okay. Let me go through. Okay. So the first one is completely obvious.
Yeah.
The second one, less obvious, much more subtle, because it is only in the mind level, right? It hasn't yet come up, but
we can still aware.
you can be still aware of it through mindfulness. Yes. How can you be aware of latent tendencies?
It comes up by itself.
It comes up by itself.
You won't know.
Oh, I didn't say that. I didn't say that. I didn't say that. Now, without vipassana. Okay, let me give you an experience that I had, a meditation experience that I had, progressing very well at a certain stage. And then there was the feeling, the experience that there was like I was as if I were walking along and a skeleton hand came up from the ground and grabbed my leg and said, don't, you better stop. All right, holding me back. This was the latent tendency of aversion, fear, because I was about to enter into a type of meditation that was quite fearful. And the latent tendency of fear knew, the mind knew, I know where you're going, it's not good. And so it was afraid. Actually, it was good, but it was afraid. So the mind was afraid, saying, I don't want you to go there. So it became, it physically felt like this skeleton hand was grabbing me and pulling me back from progressing. When I brought it up with the teacher said, just note it. Continue your practice. Be aware. That was the advice. So I was not aware of the latent tendency until it reached up and started to grab me. And that experience of it reaching up and grab me told me, aha, I know that there is this latent tendency there. There is another story in the commentary of a monk became an arahat and decided to go back and pay respect to his teacher. And this monk who was an arahat, he happened to have the psychic knowledge of being able to see inside other people's minds, read other people's thoughts. And he saw that his teacher was not yet fully enlightened. Okay? His teacher thought he was enlightened, but he was not. All right? So the arahat said, okay, what's a skillful way of helping my teacher out, respectfully helping my teacher out, and pointing out to my teacher that he's still got work to do. So The monk, the Arhat, said to the teacher, "Teacher, I know you have great powers of concentration. I want you to create in your mind this beautiful big lake." The teacher said, "No problem, big lake." "Teacher, please put a lotus flower, a huge lotus, on the middle of the lake." Lotus flower, got it, no problem, lotus flower. "Teacher, put a naked woman on top of that lotus flower." Teacher did that and went, "Wait a minute." I recognized that there was this latent tendency of lust reaching up. And so that was the message to the teacher that, okay, I've still got ways to go. All right?
Then, in your opinion, what's the condition that results that the latent tendency arise?
Okay.
See, for the teacher, no problem because the assistant pointed out. But let's say in your case, what do you think is the condition or the ingredients that this tendency comes up?
You can never tell when they're going to pop up. You can tell when they have popped up
Yeah,
because you can recognize the unwholesome state. Okay? So the teacher recognized in his mind the unwholesome state. I recognized in my mind the resistance, which is aversion, right? Resistance, aversion, normally we translate it as anger or hatred. It's anything where you don't accept the current situation. That's aversion, all right? So, and we'll do a deep dive on that. But what I recognized is that there was something that was holding me back. And so recognizing that quality of holding me back was knowing that, okay, that was a aversion rooted chitta that was happening right there. The nature of the attachment rooted is stickiness. If there is the desire for, ooh, this is nice, let this continue, okay, that's attachment. There's a stickiness element to it. Doesn't have to be love or lust. Any kind of stickiness is attachment rooted. Any kind of pulling away is aversion rooted. Non-acceptance is aversion rooted. So these are the ways in which you can know when the latent tendency becomes active is because it's like a recipe. Latent tendency, which all of us have unless we're past the Sotapanna stage, all the latent tendencies are still there, plus unwise attention, seeing things from a perspective that is not through the eyes of the Dhamma, seeing things as permanent, seeing things as beautiful, seeing things as self. All of these wrong views, unwise attention, are the condition together with the latent defilement for specific unwholesome cittas to arise. Yeah.
Further on this latent tendency, right? Also, twins we have this so all this one, so all this latent tendency, most of it which of which
Okay. Last class we went through, there were 7 latent tendencies, right?
Yeah.
So latent tendency to aversion, attachment, latent tendency to aversion, latent tendency to delusion, conceit, many different latent tendencies. So they cover the whole spectrum. They cover the whole spectrum. Yep. Okay, we'll start our deep dive. Any questions online from the people remote? All right. So now we're going to explore the attachment-rooted cittas, numbers 1 to 8. We're going to do a deep dive on them. These, for us as worldlings, these are the most commonly arising unwholesome cittas, all right? They happen constantly, all the time, at different levels of intensity, but these are the most common. These are the most common activities of the mind are these 8. The first 2, 1 and 2, these 2 attachment-rooted cittas are unprompted and prompted with wrong view and pleasant feeling. they've got with that, because of that pleasant feeling, they've got momentum. They push forward. Because of the wrong view, there is this justification. So these are the strongest, the most potent of the unwholesome of attachment rooted cittas. Number one, number two, because they've got the pleasant feeling, which gives them momentum and push, gives them energy, and they've got the wrong view, which justifies the action, the attachment, the greed that is behind it. The third and fourth are unprompted and prompted, without wrong view, with pleasant feeling. Now, the difference between the first two and the second two is with or without wrong view. And this is quite important for a yogi. If you can, when meditating, and recognize that, hey, I'm liking this experience as an example. If there's a wrong view at the same time, that means there's like two layers that you gotta get through, not only the momentum of the pleasant feeling, but that justification, that rationalization. So it's really tough to uproot. Without wrong view, mindfulness and clear comprehension in vipassana lays them more bare and makes it easier to deal with. Okay, so when there is a won't get into those. All right, so that's the main difference between the first two and the second two, is lack of wrong view. And the final four, they follow the same pattern as 1 to 4 and 5 to 8 follow the same pattern, except now they've got neutral feeling. Right? Now, the ones in neutral feeling, they are insidious. They are much more difficult to recognize. The pleasant feeling is easy to recognize. Neutral feeling is more difficult. Later, I will give you an analogy, but let me just do it now. It's a little bit out of sequence. The ones that are with pleasant feeling, it's like fire. It's obvious. It's immediate. And you can put it out easily. So when something gets destroyed by fire, that's like the pleasant feeling. Neutral feeling is like being destroyed through rust. When something gets rusty. Not so obvious. It's always kind of there in the background, slowly working away. Much more difficult to get rid of. You've got to sand it down and you've got to really coat it to protect against the rust. So the yogi needs to be aware of both and protect it against both. The obvious ones, the fire, and the subtle ones like rust. Both are destructive, but they destroy in different ways at different time scales, and they accumulate. The rust is much more difficult to get rid of than the fire, because the fire is obvious, you can put it out. The rust, much more difficult to address, because you don't even notice. All right. So every instance of attachment-rooted consciousness is categorized into one of 8 distinct types based on 3 factors: whether it's unprompted or prompted, whether wrong view is present or absent, and whether the feeling is pleasant or neutral. So from a Abhidhamma point of view, it's with different cittas. The prompted and unprompted are with the prompted have sloth and torpor. Cittas, the unprompted do not. So there is a way of telling the difference by cittas. With and without wrong view, wrong view is a cittasika. The feeling element component, Vedana, of pleasant or neutral, that's another thing. So from the Abhidhamma point of view, it can be differentiated. But also from a Vipassana point of view, it can also be differentiated. So not only is it good from a theoretical point, this characterization, these three dimensions are useful for not only from theoretical Abhidhamma perspective, but from a practical perspective, it is obvious to the yogi, or it can be obvious to the yogi. They can segment when is there sloth and torpor present? Be aware of it. They can see the wrong view. They can experience the feeling. So it's something that can be experienced as well. So the three dimensions are not just theoretical, but they're also practical as well. So the three axes can be directly observed: unprompted versus prompted. Does the mind move immediately or only after hesitation? With or without wrong view? Is there an implicit view such as this will satisfy me? Pleasant versus neutral feeling? Is the grasping accompanied by a quiet, habitual holding? The neutral feeling, I talked about the difference between neutral and pleasant feeling, the fire and the rust. The fire is more of a trigger. It was triggered by something. Rust is more like a habit. You got a bad habit. Okay? And the feeling isn't pleasant, it's neutral, but there's still this attachment to it. And the best example I can think of is doom scrolling. Wake up in the morning, you're scrolling on your phone. All right. Usually there's no attachment, there's no unpleasant feeling, but there is this stickiness to it. Oh, just let me see what messages I have. No, let me just see what's on Facebook. Let me just see this, let me just see that. So there is that. That's an example of neutral feeling. Later I call it zombie greed because it happens like a zombie. Yes.
Face smiling and
Okay.
what does that mean?
What do the faces mean? I'm sorry, I should have explained. Yeah, the words prompted, unprompted, I'll explain them. The wrong view are words. This is the associated feeling. Every time the mind is all, this is one of the things about the Abhidhamma. One of the breakthroughs of the Abhidhamma is it recognizes that there are actually three kinds of feelings. Pleasant feeling, which is quite obvious. Unpleasant feeling, here with the attachment, the aversion rooted, which is quite obvious. But there's also neutral feeling, which is much more subtle.
Wrong view, we have a very pleasant feeling.
Okay, number one. Chitta number one is unprompted with wrong view with pleasant feeling. Chitta number two is prompted with wrong view, pleasant feeling. Okay, so that's how you read this chart here. Yeah.
But this wrong view, right? It's wrong view on the qualitative and also on the karma.
The main aspect of wrong view, and we're going to do a deep dive into wrong view, but it has to do with the idea of self.
Yes.
Self.
Yeah.
Relating things to a self.
Then this one get right. This one has the highest weightage on the say on this karma, say action.
Okay, which creates the weightiest karma? Now, I'm going to talk about this from two different perspectives: short term and long term.
Yeah.
All right. Short term, the unprompted, which is spontaneous. Spontaneous creates more karma than, or strong weightier karma than prompted. So on this axis of prompted versus unprompted, at one instant, the spontaneous or unprompted generates weightier karma. Okay, so that's on that axis. Now, with wrong view, since you have that reinforcement, justification, with wrong view are stronger than without wrong view, other factors being equal. Pleasant feeling gives a push, gives a motivation, gives an energy that you just don't get with the neutral feeling. So the strongest is going to be unprompted with wrong view and pleasant feeling. Number one is going to be creating the weightiest karma, all other factors being equal.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, because you have to take into account so many other factors, but everything else being equal, unprompted, withdrawn view, pleasant feeling is the weightiest karma. However, that's just one time. That's just one time. But what happens is, let's just say somebody does something. I'm going to switch to aversion for a moment. Somebody insults me. At the moment, spontaneously, I go, "Ooh, I'm angry," right? So at that moment, that creates a spontaneous, which is number 9, with ill will, unpleasant feeling. Okay, that creates weighty karma at that moment. However, for the next 3 days, I'm still remembering it and reliving it and going back on it and just again and again and again. This is prompted. I am continuing to build it up in my own mind. Even though the incident happened 3 days ago, I'm still reliving it and saying, "Oh, I should have said this back to him," and "Oh, how could he say that?" And all these unwholesome thoughts that are aversion rooted. But these ones are prompted, self-prompted, right? So over time, which one is more weighty? The prompted is going to be more prompted over time.
Yeah.
The initial, yes. Spontaneous is weightier. But over time, prompted can, if you dwell on it, really accumulate to build up. Not only that, we talked about the natural decisive support condition. When you keep repeating it again and again and again, it builds a habit. So it's not just karma, it turns you into a negative person. All right, that one insult can put you into a bad mood that covers not many aspects of your life. All right, so it turns into a habit that impacts even next life. So you've got to be really careful of the prompted ones, the repetition of the prompted cittas. Okay, all right. So now we're going to look at unprompted versus prompted. I'm going to explain those two. Unprompted indicates that the citta arises spontaneously with full energy. Okay, so it just happened naturally. There is nothing holding me back. Now, I want to make a comment here. It's a very subtle point. When you look at the overall chart of cittas, you'll see unprompted and prompted happening in here, the unwholesome cittas. You'll see the same terms being used for wholesome cittas, and you'll see the same terms being used for life continuum cittas. But in each of those 3 cases, prompted and unprompted mean different things. It can be a little bit confusing, very subtle point. With unwholesome cittas, prompted versus unprompted refers to the natural energy being part of the citta. So unprompted, spontaneous and full energy. Prompted indicates that citta has sloth and torpor, laziness and tiredness. When they are there, the mind just doesn't have the energy. It's got no energy, doesn't want to. And therefore arises after some form of inducement, whether external, another person, or internal, your own deliberate reflective effort. So when you're talking about unprompted and prompted with respect to unwholesome cittas, it is having to do with the presence or absence of sloth and torpor, tiredness and laziness, those kind of factors. If there is tiredness and laziness in an unwholesome, then the citta doesn't have the energy, doesn't have the momentum. It requires some form of inducement to come up, and that makes it prompted. Unprompted is full energy and spontaneous. To quickly jump ahead, when we talk about wholesome, there's no wholesome cittas. There is no sloth and torpor involved. It has to do with the external rather than internal. Internal sloth and torpor is one thing. External inducement, somebody copying somebody or psyching yourself up versus happening spontaneously. That is for wholesome. And prompted versus unprompted, when you come to life continuum, refers to the way it impacts is a person with a an unprompted chittasika as life continuum. They tend to be more of a spontaneous character, whereas someone with a prompted life continuum chitta tends to be a little bit more reserved. So same names used in 3 different ways. So here we're talking about prompted and unprompted in unwholesome chittas. It's a fairly subtle, maybe I'm going too much detail into it, but it's a fairly subtle Abhidhamma point. So all prompted attachment-rooted chittas arise with chittasikas of sloth and torpor. An attachment-rooted chitta is designated as prompted because it is accompanied by sloth and torpor. So it's by definition, that's what makes it prompted, is the existence of sloth and torpor. And sloth and torpor is very easy to observe. The mind I remember just doing my walking meditation, and observing the mind that was noting. The observing mind could see that the noting mind just didn't want to follow the detail of the steps. It was kind of like, oh. So there's one mind who is noting, not really into it, lazy, blur, tired. And then there's an observing mind going, oh, that's interesting, seeing how that's working. So I brought it to my teacher, and my teacher said, the 2 minds aren't happening at the same time, even though it feels that way. It's rapidly alternating between one and the other. And whoever you feed, wherever you put more attention, that's the one that's going to grow. So don't put growth on the lazy one. Don't put attention on the lazy one. Put more attention on the observing mind that is analyzing and exploring. That's the one where you put your energy, your attention, and naturally it will take the physical energy will take care of itself during the walking meditation. And that's exactly what happened. It's exactly what happened. So as an analogy, you consider a heavy door. If the heavy door swings open easily, no extra force needed, it's like an unprompted chitta, quick, unimpeded. If the heavy door is stiff and resistant, you need to push deliberately, like a chitta requiring prompting. But it's not the push in the case of unwholesome, it's not so much the push, it's the hinge. In this analogy, the stiffness of the hinge corresponds to sloth and torpor. Yes, they go together. If you've got a sticky hinge, you've got sloth and torpor. Okay, and that makes the sticky hinge makes that door prompted. As another analogy, consider a light bulb with a dimmer switch. An unprompted attachment-rooted chitta is like the lamp at full brightness, burning with full intensity. A prompted chitta is like the same lamp, it's still bright, still gives light, still does all the same function, except when the dimmer is engaged, the light still functions, but both sloth and torpor reduces the output. And why I like this analogy, is that it really reinforces the fact that sloth and torpor are not a yes/no. It's on a grid. It's on a whole scale. Sometimes there's a little bit of sloth and torpor, sometimes there's a lot of sloth and torpor, and so it's whereas prompted versus unprompted, it sounds like it's a yes/no, but really comes down to the level of the intensity. So an unprompted attachment-rooted chitta is generally more comically potent than its prompted counterpart. Other conditions being equal, because the attachment operates with full, unrestricted momentum. So the unprompted, spontaneous, full energy, full momentum, stronger comic weight, with, like I mentioned earlier, right? Although unprompted attachment-rooted chittas are individually stronger than the prompted ones, repeated indulgence often involves many prompted chittas sustained through deliberate attention and mental reinforcement. You keep going and, oh, that was a great meal. I really enjoyed that meal. So you ate once, that's the spontaneous. But then you just keep thinking about that, how great that meal was, and it keeps reinforcing. And so the prompted ones, over time, this accumulation of numerous karma creating moments can generate greater total karma than the effect of a single unprompted chitta. All right. So I talked about that earlier. Okay. Any questions on prompted versus unprompted? All right. We're now going to move to wrong view. There's different view. They're mainly related to view of the self. Okay. And actually, in the Brahmajala Sutta, it breaks down 62 kinds of wrong views that were around at the time of the Buddha. And the Buddha said things like eternalism, the self exists forever, annihilationism, the self is destroyed in death. And many of these, and it's interesting because the source of each of these 62 wrong views is traced back in that sutta. And most of them come from combination of theorizing, intellectual philosophizing, and meditative experience, deep meditative experience that gets misinterpreted. So at the time of the Buddha, there were some great meditators that had visited seen previous lives, right? So imagine this. You're meditating, you attain jhana, and you experience past lives. You're going to naturally come to the conclusion that, hey, I used to be this person, and before that I was that person. That was direct experience from you, right? That speaks directly to your heart because you experienced it directly in your deep meditation. So you come up with the idea of, hey, the self exists forever. Because you trace back 10,000 lives and saying, hey, I was there for 10,000 lives, I exist forever. So it's natural through deep meditation. Eternalism can happen. Through through rational philosophizing, you could say, hey, the self is destroyed at death. I've never seen any proof of life after death. Right? So therefore, logically, analytically, I've got no proof of anybody ever coming back. So therefore, my belief is that we die after. There's nothing left after death. And then there's different combinations of those. But there's all these wrong views the Buddha countered with his right view of dependent origination. Examples of wrong views. This feeling of happiness is mine. I am happy. Right? If you're in it, sometimes I talked about this before. Sometimes I've been in an interview with more than one person, and I listen to the other person talking, the other yogi speaking. And if every sentence starts with I or my, I know, okay, this person is still stuck on views. If they say, oh, I felt this pain in my leg, all right, I kind of can guess what the teacher is going to guide them, right? So this feeling of happiness is mine, or I will be truly fulfilled if I can hold on to this relationship with achievement or meditative state. The desire, I experienced it this morning. I really want to get that same thing back again. That is a wrong view of I. The whole thing of I can control my thoughts and can decide what arises in my mind. A yogi very quickly realizes that thoughts arise just because of conditions. There's nothing that can be controlled. There's no control is an illusion. It just arises because of the self view. An attachment rooted achievement with the wrong view, in terms of comically potential, is generally more comically potent than its counterpart without wrong view, other conditions being equal, right? Because that wrong view justifies and rationalizes and organizes that attachment. Wrong view does not simply intensify attachment, but distorts it by taking the object through a lens of misapprehension, such as permanence, control, or self. So this idea of wrong view, it's not just justifying, it's giving a whole different perspective. It's changing how things are experienced. Gives it that view distorts the experience to fit the previous patterns. So it is structural. It's not just a belief. It is structurally and fundamentally distorting the wrong view. The wrong view fundamentally distorts the experience. So the four attachment-rooted cittas with wrong view are uprooted by the Sotapanna. We already mentioned that. So 1, 2, 5, and 6, Sotapanna gets rid of them. Attachment-rooted cittas without wrong view that may still arise in the Sotapanna. So a Sotapanna can still say, hey, I like this food. I prefer a quiet place to meditate. I understand Dhamma better than others. I hope that this peaceful sitting continues. So even a Sotapanna can have those kinds of thoughts. Those are all attachment rooted. You see how they're all sticky. These are all attachment rooted thoughts. They can still arise in a Sotapanna, even though the Sotapanna has uprooted the personality view of the idea of a self. There's still, this food's good, I like it. Okay? And in conversations, they may still use words like I, me, my. The Buddha himself used terms like I, me, my in the suttas. But in one sutta, he said, I use these terms without grasping onto them, without misinterpreting them. I use them for conventional language to communicate, but I don't grasp onto them. So my judgment of my fellow yogi who said, I have pain in my knee, may be wrong. Maybe they're already a Sotapanna. Although both involve a notion of I, the Cittas of wrong view and conceit never arise together. Wrong view asserts a view such as this is myself, whereas conceit compares, like I'm better, equal, or worse. In the four attachment-rooted cittas without wrong view, so even in a Sotapanna, subtle conceit can still operate even in the absence of a belief in self. Conceit, that is comparison to others, continues into the Arahat stage, even though there's no view of self. And this is a little bit hard to get your head around. How can an Anagami, up to the third level of sainthood, still have conceit? They uprooted the idea of a permanent self or any form of self behind the namas and rupas that arise. But there could still arise the thought of my set of nama rupas is different from your set of nama rupas, is better or different. any form of comparison, better, equal, worse, any that, even though they don't believe in the self behind it, they still associate, have a comparison of these nama rupas from one being to another. At the Arahat level, the universe is one. There is no difference between namas and rupas of different beings. It's just different phenomena arising. Namas arise, rupa arises because of conditions. So even though there is no idea of a self, saints up until Arahat can still have a ability to compare, tendency to compare, the latent tendency of conceit, of comparison. So conceit and wrong view are mutually exclusive chittasikas in the single chitta because they take the self in different ways. Wrong view misapprehends the nature of the self, while conceit compares a presumed self to others. In Vipassana practice, the chitta accompanied by wrong view cannot support liberating insight, as it fundamentally misconstrues the nature of phenomena. In other words, when there's wrong view, there's this lens that distorts what is experienced. Cannot progress with that lens. That lens is the idea of self. See, everything with the idea of self. A similar chitta without wrong view can be more readily known. The observer chitta that I talked about, the observer mind that looks in the noting mind, the observer mind can look and say, I see what's going on. Now, that observer mind doesn't have any idea of a self. It's observing a mind. And so that observer mind can observe through mindfulness and wisdom and see how that noting mind is operating. And it doesn't have a wrong view. The noting mind can have a wrong view. The noting mind can say, I am tired. The observing mind says, there is tiredness. There is sloth, there is torpor, there is laziness, there is dragginess, there is whatever the experience is. The observing mind can do that, and there's no I. Unwise attention conditions the arising of unattachment rooted chittas, especially those accompanied by wrong view, whereas wise attention supports the weakening eventual sensation. All right, so what are the three things that lead to spiritual development? Wise attention, seeing things through the eyes of the Dhamma. Manasikara. Then, Kayanamita, a good friend, someone to bring you along and help you and support you. And then, hearing the Dhamma. Those are the three factors that lead to spiritual development. Attachment inherently involves a movement toward the object, a pleasurable or at a minimum neutral orientation towards something desired. Attachment-rooted chittas never arise with unpleasant feeling. Attachment-rooted chittas with pleasant feeling are generally more comically potent because the delight intensifies the grasping, produces stronger mental impressions. So here we've gone through all three different axes. That the unprompted or spontaneous is comically stronger. First time it happens, right? The habitual prompted becomes cumulatively a lot stronger. With wrong view, because it's got that distorting lens that stops seeing things as they truly are, of unwise attention, that with wrong view is stronger. And pleasant is stronger because it allows full energy, because it's stronger mental impression because of the delight. Attachment-rooted chittas with pleasant feeling always include the chittasika of zest or piti. It intensifies the attraction to the object by adding a pleasurable excitement that makes the mind cling even more eagerly. Zest increases the comic strength of the chitta. Zest also arises in wholesome chittas with pleasant feeling, except for some higher jhana chittas, which technical points, but it's not. Zest is Comically, can be wholesome or unwholesome. Okay, doesn't necessarily, it's not just unwholesome. Attachment rooted changes with neutral feeling may appear milder, but become more insidious in practice. The sticky impulse is present without the obvious marker of excitement, making it harder to detect. So the yogi who catches obvious attachment with pleasant feeling, like wanting, may entirely miss the quieter attachment with neutral feeling that underpins habitual habit, accumulation, and self-preference. Pleasant feeling supports a more overt and energized form of grasping, whereas neutral feeling supports a quieter, more continuous form of attachment that can persist unnoticed over longer periods. So in this way, pleasant feeling tends towards intensity, while neutral feeling tends towards continuity and habit building. In daily life, attachment-rooted cheating with neutral feeling can be a zombie greed. That's my picture of a zombie. Like mine, an example I think of is mindless digital scrolling or doom scrolling. That's an example. You're not actually enjoying the activity, but the mind continues to grab and stick to the object without any joy. You're creating unwholesome karma even when you feel bored or indifferent. You think, I'm not doing anything wrong, I'm just scrolling. There's attachment. Pleasant feeling isn't there, that is the big red flag, but it's still attachment. Attachments that passive consumption does not require pleasure to be harmful. Sometimes the mind keeps taking a dull object even when there's no enjoyment. When attachment-rooted chitta with pleasant feeling arises, the yogi should know liking, to see the pleasant feeling as conditioned rather than my joy. When an attachment-rooted chitta with neutral feeling, the yogi should know sticky, to catch the subtle zombie greed before it slips into habitual patterns. So the idea behind vipassana is note the mind. Don't get wrapped up in the object. Don't get wrapped up in the what is being attached to. Put the mind to the note the state of the mind and give it a label like liking when pleasant feeling, or sticking with neutral feeling. So neutral feeling attachment is like rust forming on iron. There's no flame, no obvious heat, no dramatic consumption. Yet the metal is being eaten away steadily and invisibly. Pleasant feeling attachment is like fire. It's obvious, it burns brightly, and it can be seen and felt. The yogi needs to learn to watch for both. Okay? So, any questions? I'm about to go into some frequently asked questions. Well, I'm going to save that to the next class. Any other questions on this?
Ultimately, you need vipassana to get to eliminate all these wrong evil attachment.
Okay. To eliminate all of these attachment-rooted version, to eliminate, to reduce, okay,
improve.
then it is training. If you want to uproot, then there must be sainthood, right? Because that gets rid of the latent tendency that allows these things to arise in the first place, right? So that is like getting rid of the roots, getting rid of a plant. Sure, you can prune the leaves, that's at a superficial. You can put a rock over it, but the roots are still there. When you move the rock, the plant will come back up again. Or you can dig it up completely. Digging it up completely needs sainthood. And that requires insight, wisdom, mindfulness, vipassana, to weaken them. Okay? To weaken them Vipassana will help, but even concentration, building up good habits will help, replacing unwholesome with wholesome. So let's say you have a particular tendency towards attachment, right? A greedy tendency. You want to get rid of it for good? You have to go all the way, well, in terms of a sense object, you have to go at least to anagami. However, if you want to reduce it in a more practical way, mindful dana, mindful giving, generosity is a way to train the mind. Okay? The people, so actually offering dana from your heart is a practice of generosity. Doesn't necessarily have to be high value. Even just showing up is of value. That's your time that you're giving. So sharing, giving, that is generosity. Building up that habit will weaken the tendency to stickiness and attachment. Aversion, yes, you have to get to the anagami level before you're going to completely uproot it. However, if you are a person, if you do look at yourself and say, you know, I'm a very fault-finding kind of person, I get angry easily, practice metta meditation. When practicing metta meditation, radiating loving kindness, you are training the mind, instilling these new practices and these new habits in the mind of looking at things through the lens of make everyone be well and happy. That's an example of practice through concentration, of weakening. So, yes, to uproot, you need vipassana. However, to weaken, building up appropriate habits will weaken. Through vipassana and starting to see things, seeing how the mind is operating behind the scene, that allows you to dig deeper and deeper and deeper. You may not completely uproot it, but you start to get deeper and deeper, seeing the defilements and the latent tendencies. Okay?
Very good. Any suggestion about weakening and how about delusion? Any way
Okay.
weakening it, which what you gave a good example of an extreme aversion.
Okay.
Any way for
delusion, obviously you're going to be arhat to completely uproot it. But for daily life, studying the Dhamma, reflecting on the Dhamma, okay? These things are going to really help. Attending Abhidhamma class. That'll help. And then, but when you leave, thinking about it, right? Reflecting on it, training the mind, that will help overcome delusion. All right? Kind of uproot it. Sorry, not uproot, but at least suppress some of those. Yes.
Okay, but what I managed to find my notes on the several latest this tendency, right? So if I want to map it out under this restricted vision, right? I'll just make sure that I got it correct. Is it possible for you to just run what I say the seven map it out under the
okay. So here are the underside. First one is attachment. Aversion. What's the next one? Can you read for me? I want to put them in the order.
Attachment to existence.
Yeah, okay, to existence.
And wrong view.
Wrong view.
That's it.
Yeah.
The ignorance or illusion and ignorance. Then doubt.
Sorry, ignorance.
Yeah.
Doubt.
Aversion.
Aversion. And there's going to be attachment to the sense object, central attachment. All right, attention to existence, to sense object, right? Okay. Attachment to existence and sense object, we've talked about those, right?
Yeah.
We talked about wrong view over here. I just mentioned conceit, right? Ignorance is delusion, which I want to point out, that is the enabler for all of them. Ignorance is behind the scenes for all of the unwholesome states. Doubt, we have it right here, associated with doubt. Aversion is 9 and 10. So it's a pretty clear mapping. Right?
Conceit was underwear.
Conceit is under without wrong view. Okay? It can, without wrong view, can either be with or without conceit. Okay?
Any particular reason why conceit? You need to get the higher level of conceit.
Okay.
Why is it easier to get it of self, I? Yes, but very difficult to get it.
Why is it so difficult to get rid of conceit?
Yeah, whereas self is easier. I mean, with the
Yeah, okay. Why is it easier to get rid of the idea of a self
Yes.
than conceit? Conceit, think of it as comparison. Any form of comparison of equal, better, or worse is conceit. That is a different level of activity than the very gross, fixed belief of there is a self behind me. This I, me, mine. But they are attached to each other. In the Pali text, they have this term asmimana, okay, which is the I am conceit. So the conceit of existence is something that when in the texts, the Buddha talked, in the sutras, the Buddha talked about that as fundamentally behind stopping the sotapanna from the sotapanna. Okay, so one is a doctrinal belief. The other is more of a habit of comparing. It's easier it's cleaner to get rid of a doctrinal belief of a self than it is a habit of comparing. Comparing is much more insidious than this whole fixed view. What the neuroscientists have recognized is that when they analyze what's going on inside the brain, when stuff comes in through the senses, through at least the 5 senses, it first goes to a specific part of the brain, or a few parts of the brain, orientation association area, where it is organized around this concept of self. Okay, so in other words, sense data comes in and the brain automatically organizes it around this concept of a self. This it happens in certain parts of the brain that they can measure the blood flow in, okay? And using functional MRIs. They did an experiment with meditators. And these were actually Zen meditators, sorry, not Zen, but Tibetan meditators. And what they found is that when the meditator went into a deep meditative trance, the blood flow into that part of the brain that organizes sense data drops down significantly. When they asked the meditator to describe the experience, the meditator said, I was at one with the universe. Then they took Catholic nuns who engage in deep prayer. They did the same experiment, and they found that when they were in deep prayer, deep meditative prayer, the Christian nuns were in deep, deep prayer, the blood flow also went very, very low. And when they asked the nuns to describe the experience, the nuns said, I was talking to God. I was in the presence of God. So this is this idea of disentangling the idea of a self. It's something that's like kind of physical. It's fairly easy to do. I won't say easy to do, but it's at a basic level because the brain is plastic. However, getting rid of the habit of comparing, much more difficult. And that's where conceit comes in. Even once the even once the Anagami has gotten rid of this whole idea, somehow has gotten rid of the whole idea of a permanent self. They're no longer fixed through that lens. They see everything as namas and rupas. There is still that habit over countless lifetimes of this group of namas and rupas are distinct from that group of namas and rupas. And when they're distinct, there's a dichotomy there. There's an inherent comparison of better than equal to or less. And that is what is defined as conceit. Actually, maybe a better term for conceit might be comparison, because that's really closer to what the Pali term mana really reflects.
To put it in simple terms, one eye is a hardware.
Yeah.
Conceit is a software.
That might be a way of saying it. Yes, I is a hardware and conceit is a software. Yeah, that's a good way of saying it. Yeah. Easier to change your hardware than change the software.
Yeah. More complicated.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions? All right, if not, we're running a little bit over time. Okay, so if somebody could read the reflection.
Reflection. Let us recall to our mind